In this video, we'll show you how to remove and replace your master cylinder on a Toyota Camry, located in the engine compartment right in front of the driver's seat. So I'm going to take the cover off and I'm going to retract all the brake fluid that I can. And I have a vacuum type thing. You can use like a turkey baster or vacuum type. There are chambers in a master cylinder, so you're not going to get all of it out, but you can get as much as you can just to help. That's good enough. We'll get the rest later. So now I'm just going to put the cover back on. And let's break free the two lines, and that's a 10mm wrench. I like to use a flaring wrench, which is basically used for brake lines or fuel lines. Hopefully yours breaks free. Don't be afraid to use a little bit of penetrating spray. There we go. And wiggle it back and forth. That just assures that it's not stuck on that line. Now I'm not going to take it all the way out because I don't want to make a mess while I'm unbolting it. I just want to make sure I can break it free while it's mounted firmly. Now we're going to take the brake level sensor off. Just disconnect it by pushing that tab in and pull. Let's get that out of the way. 2 mounting bolts to the brake booster right here. We have 2 nuts. And on this car, it is a 12mm. I'm going to use a deep socket because of the stud. And break that free. Now behind this one, there should be another nut, I'm assuming, because it's just holding on this damper valve. Set that aside. And now over here, I'm going to use a wrench because I won't get that socket in there. So a 12mm wrench. Let's see if we can break it free. Get all the corrosion come off. Let's get that out. Now make sure you have a catch basin underneath or an absorbent pad because you will lose a little bit of brake fluid, especially where we're going to have to take this back line off to get this bracket out of the way to grab that other nut. So I'm going to go get myself a little basin and put it in the underneath. Now I can just take this line and retract it right out of that master. If any of you have done any brake lines before, you'll know that this is pretty lucky that these work so smoothly. Somehow we have to pry it off that stud. Get some motion. There we go. Now it looks like we're going to have to take the front one off too. And there's the fluid leakage. It's always good to make sure you have a can of parts cleaner or brake clean real close because you want to clean that. You don't want that brake fluid sitting on anything, especially paint, plastic. You want to neutralize it as fast as possible. There isn't any. Cool beans. Now grab the master cylinder and pull it. Pull it right out of that brake booster and the mounting. So before we install the master cylinder, I like to bench bleed it. Some people put it in the car and bleed it that way. I like to do it this way. So if you're going to choose a bench bleed, I like to use a vise, hold it steady. You're going to fill it up with clean brake fluid. Make sure you check your cap or manual for the reference of what type of brake fluid for this particular vehicle. Put the cap back on. So with a master cylinder, sometimes you'll get a kit that's like a little plastic straws with the plastic caps on it. What you want to do is you're going to thread them in like so. These are little homemade ones that we use around the shop so that we can use them multiple times. You're going to do it to both plungers. Basically what we're doing here is we're directing the fluid to go right back into the master reservoir while I basically hand pump it. But you have to have these straws or the tips of these things submerged in brake fluid. That's the key. My flare nuts are 12mm. Snug those up. Once they're snug, there should be no leaks. Now the next important part of this is what you use to plunge the diaphragm back and forth. I use brass, and brass only, or a wooden dowel. Some people grab screwdrivers and stuff. If you score this up, or if it's a hard plastic form and not aluminum or metal, you could do damage. So brass punch is the best way to go. Basically, we're going to plunger it just like it's a brake pedal until the air pushes out, it keeps coming around, and you'll watch the bubbles in the reservoir. And you want to go at a slow pace, because if not, you're going to make a mess. And you'll see the bubbles go up, and basically what's happening now is it's sucking the fluid back down, so keep an eye on that. I have my fluid right here, ready to go. I'm going to make sure that it stays above the entrance of those tubes. And when you push on it, you'll see air bubbles, and then it will suck it back down. Sometimes you can solve this in like 4 pushes. Might be all set. Just do it till you see no more air bubbles. Nice, even pace. All the way down and back up. I'm all set. I have no more air bubbles. So now I'm going to take these off, put my cover on, and bring it back to the car. You will get some residual spillage. It's not that big of a deal. The good news is it can't reverse air into the cylinder, so we'll just leave it at that. Plus, you're always going to want to bleed your brakes after, once it gets in the car. Okay. If you have caps, go ahead and use them. Now, before reinstalling the master, you want to look here on the brake booster. Confirm there's no brake fluid in here, like any. But if there's definitely a puddle, then you know that the booster is going to be no good because the seal's been sucking brake fluid in there. So you'd have to replace that booster at the same time. Right now, as it's dry, I just cleaned a little bit of debris out, and you want to make sure that you have a little bit of dielectric grease inside this little boot cylinder because it's going to ride on that little steel nub. Let's now bring it on down. Line up those studs in the plunger, and I'm going to start the lines without bolting it in by hand. That way I can freely wiggle the master around to make sure the threads start and not cross thread. Same with the top. Nice. We'll get the 2 mounting nuts. Put this one on by hand. And then this one. $12mm socket. I'm going to snug it up. I'm going to leave that right there. Get my ratchet wrench. Do the back one. I'm just snugging it so I can really tighten these lines and stop them from dripping. 10mm wrench. Let's get that on there. Get this mess to stop. And then let's do the back one. Let's get some brake clean or parts cleaner. Let's spray this mess down. Okay. All right, so with my 12mm socket, I'm going to snug these up. I don't think I'm going to get in there with this, and I'm not. So I'm going to use my long wrench, 12mm wrench. All right, so I could not find any torque specs. So basically it's 8mm bolt or stud. So you just want to snug it in a good 1/8 of a turn. Have it bottom out, 1/8 of a turn. Perfect. Now let's really snug up those lines with that flaring wrench, 10mm flaring wrench. And I just want to make sure it is tight. You don't want any air being vacuumed in. Good to go. Let's put our level sensor back on. There's a little clip behind the master that harness snaps into. And then we'll just lock that right in. Hear the click.
Now we're going to start our brake bleeding process on the right rear of the vehicle. You can see our wheel is gone, and the brake bleeding port right here on the top is an 8mm. So it's best to go ahead around the vehicle, and you can use a socket and a ratchet and loosen these bleeder screws just a little bit and then tighten them back up before we start this process. It'll make it easier for you before you go ahead and dig into this. Now once you have that snug back down, you want to make sure that you have a container to capture the fluid as you bleed the brakes. Now we have someone up inside the vehicle, and what they're going to do is they're going to pump up the brake pedal about 3-4 times to make sure that that pedal is nice and firm. Once they hold it firm, I'm going to open this up and let that brake fluid come out. That brake pedal inside the vehicle will go to the floor. Once that pedal is at the floor, we will tighten this bleeder screw, and we're going to repeat this process until all the fluid is clean and there's no air bubbles coming out of that line. Once that right rear is done, we're then going to proceed to the left rear, driver's side rear, then the passenger side front, and we're going to finish with the left front wheel. Let's go ahead and start this process. Now what we're going to do is get our port up here. I'm going to press that on to the bleeder. And now we're going to have that person inside the vehicle go ahead and pump up the brakes and hold them. Go ahead and use that wrench there to go ahead and open up that bleeder screw. You can see that fluid coming down.
On the floor.
All right, so once you see it's on the floor, you want to go ahead and close that back up. That'll allow them to go ahead and repeat this process and build up pressure. Go ahead.
Holding. On the floor.
You can see we had some air bubbles come out of there, so we want to continue to do this. Go ahead.
Holding. On the floor.
Now we're still having air bubbles. Now we're going to continue this process. It could take you just a couple times, or it could take you several times to go ahead and make sure there's no air bubbles left in this. Go ahead.
Holding.
And we'll do one more time.
Holding. Floor.
So we'll go ahead and pop off our port here. You do want to make sure this is snug. You can use your ratchet if you want, or your wrench. If you have any brake fluid that is leaking out a little bit, you can use some solvent to spray that and clean it. All right, let's go over to the driver's side rear. All right, go ahead and pump it up.
Holding. Floor.
Okay, pump it up.
Floor.
All right. At this point here, pop off the drain port here, make sure this is snug. Give that a spray with some solvent to clean up some of that residual brake fluid. And then let's move to the right front. After you've bled the two back wheels, you want to go ahead and check the reservoir. You can see that we're low on fluid here, and you do not want to go ahead and empty this, because then you're going to start sucking air into the system, and you're going to have to start that whole brake bleeding process all over again. Remove the cap. And at this point, we're just going to go ahead and fill it up to the max line. Grab the cap, press that back on, make sure it's sealed. Now the front wheel is a little bit easier to get to if you go ahead and crank that wheel to the side so the caliper is facing out towards you. Okay, pump up the brakes.
Holding. Floor.
Okay, pump it up.
Holding. Floor.
Pump it up.
Holding. Floor.
And one more time.
holding, floor,
Perfect. There's no air bubbles, and we can see clean fluid coming out. So tighten that down, remove that, and over to the driver's side front wheel. Okay, pump it up.
holding, floor,
Okay, pump.
holding, floor,
One more time.
holding, floor.
Now at this point here, that pedal should be nice and firm on the inside of the vehicle. You'd always check with that person inside. Make sure when they pump it up, it holds that pressure.
Yep.
Feels good, okay. Remove the cap. And at this point, we're just gonna go ahead and fill it up to the max line. Once you fill this up to the max line, you can go ahead and install your wheels, go for a road test, and at that point there, you're all set.
When only the best will do, demand TRQ. The only company that lets you view before you do. TRQ is committed to offering the highest quality aftermarket auto parts that are engineered for peace of mind. Thanks for using and viewing with TRQ.